Get started. Okay, today we are going to be introducing a little bit more about functions, but first we're going to start the quiz. So it's time for quiz 3. Here's the link. Same thing as always. Once you all pull it up, oh, you can't see it yet though, huh? Okay. Are you all able to access it? There's no password this time, so you should be able to just see it. Were you able to get into it? Yeah? No? Yeah? Refresh the page if you don't see it. Hi, Sadiksha. Okay, can you all see it? Yeah? Okay, go ahead and get started. I'm gonna start the timer. Get it out of the way. Just a heads up, you only have a few minutes left. Okay, wrap up your last thoughts. Okay, Megan, are you good? Yeah, 1 second, not yet? Okay. I'm going to close it as soon as Megan gives me a thumbs up. And then while she's finishing that. Okay, just some updates. So for quiz 2, these were the scores or the data. It's pretty similar to quiz 1. So a lot of you are doing a great job. If you do need help, just don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, and then retakes, just a reminder, to earn the chance to do a retake, you have to email me this Sunday, so the end of this week, with explanations for why the correct answers are correct. And to retake the quiz, I'm only allowing it for the week after. So if you've missed your chance for that following week, then I can't let you do a retake, even if you've emailed me. And again, the questions are 8 instead of 10, so you can earn up to 80% back on the retakes. Megan, are you good? Okay, I'm gonna close this. Okay. Okay, let's respond to some feedback. Yeah, any questions? Zero question? Yeah, so if you all want to do a retake, let me know as soon as you can, and then maybe by like next Wednesday, I'll let you do it. But In the future, yeah, just the following week. I know this week is kind of weird. Gabriel, did you have a question?
I just wanted to know like which office hours do you go to?
Any of them. So any of my office hours, I'm happy to do the retake during. Yeah? Okay. So responding to your feedback, some of you wanted more practice questions. We are working on this now. I just met with some of my Googler TAs, so we're putting this together. And some of you said I'm going through the slides fast. I know I might be trying to go through stuff fast, but just remember that I create these lecture notes so that you don't have to really listen to everything I say and really just kind of focus on what I'm saying and the content and not needing to write stuff down. So use that as a resource. Maybe you could try that so you don't have to worry about scribbling things down. But yeah, don't worry about not catching things the first time. I know I try to repeat stuff and I know it's gonna take some time to get used to things, so don't worry too much about it, but use the lecture notes if you want. Some of you want group assignments and projects. I also think that I learn a lot from my peers and other role models and mentors. So that's what lab is really for you to have time to work with each other. And I also am considering making Project 2 more collaborative, but I'm not sure yet. So this is a big maybe right now. A lot of you have also told me that you're struggling with quizzes and the small details. Maybe you're going too fast and not really looking and paying attention to all the details. This is something that you're going to have to learn to be good at, especially as a software engineer with what I do. I'm always so meticulous with all the small details. You have 15 minutes, and I think some of you maybe did better today. You took more of the full time, which is good, but slow down, take your time. I gave you a minute at least per question, like a minute and a half, so take your time, there's no rush. Just pay attention to all the details. And just a reminder, computers are so literal, so you really have to be meticulous. You have to look at all the details, and especially when you start to write complicated programs, the more good you are at paying attention to the details, the more important it's going to be. The better you will do when writing more complicated programs. Make sense? Okay, some of you are like, I don't really know if learning Python is that useful. I just want to remind you all that this class is about learning the concepts more than it is the programming language specifically and that syntax. So we're using Python as a vehicle. And I think Python is honestly really great because it is my go-to language for coding interviews and technical interviews. So if you want to get good at those, I would really highly recommend using Python and getting really familiar with the syntax. Y'all are learning how to be careful with these small syntax details when you're learning Python. So that's why it's still important to learn coding in a specific language. And these concepts that you're going to learn are going to apply to all these different languages. So even if you think Python isn't that useful, I think it is worth just learning how to code in a new language because you're going to have to do that again at some point later on. Make sense? Okay, let's go into functions. Any questions? Okay, so remember functions, they perform a specific action on a set of values. So you can think of it as performing a specific task. It takes in inputs, which are our data or our values, and then it performs a task on these inputs. And then sometimes it'll give you an output, sometimes it'll just do something to that data and that's it. But usually it'll have an output. So inputs and outputs of functions, again, are values or their data. So even an example like this, a parking machine, you can think of as like an analogy to a function. So when you're like leaving the parking lot or leaving the place that you went to park, you give the machine a ticket, right? So that's like your input data. And the machine will then calculate how much time has passed. It'll calculate how much you have to pay. So that's like the task that it's doing with that data. And then it'll tell you how much you need to give the machine and feed the machine. So that's like the output. It gives this information back to you. So this is an example of something that is done over and over again. It's reusable with different input, gives you different output, but you can do it on the same task. Do the same task over and over again on different input. Okay, so what are functions? They're lines of code grouped together, and they have three things. So a block of lines of code that you can reuse. So there's a name, parameters, and a return value. This is probably quite familiar, right? So when you're calling a function, one of the first things that we want to keep track of for functions is you run it by writing the name followed by parentheses. So this is how we're calling these functions, and we've seen these functions before, right? We know what they're used for. So inside those parentheses, when we call that function, we pass in parameters or arguments. And these are things that the function needs in order to run. So if we want to calculate the length of a string, well, we need to specify the string that we want the length for, right? The same thing with input. It makes sense to ask the user a question. If you left it blank, it's not as useful to us. And then if we want to print something, it makes sense to print something, right? If you had that empty, it wouldn't make sense. So parameters. These are the values that are passed into the function for it to do the job. It needs these values. So how do we do that? We have to put them inside the parentheses like we just saw. And then functions can take 0, 1, or multiple parameters or arguments, depending on what the function does. And then this last note here, when a function runs, a variable is created for each of those parameters that you pass in with the corresponding value that you passed in. That might not make a whole lot of sense now, but we are going to talk more about this when we are learning how to define our own functions. So don't worry too much about that. Just know that functions take in parameters and arguments, and it can have 0 to 1 to 2 to however many you need for that function. Okay, and the third thing to keep in mind is the return value. So the values that are returned are given to you as a result of the function doing its job. So how do we exactly use this return value? Well, usually we want to store it in a variable. Otherwise, if you call that function and it gives you some value, but you don't store it, then it's gone, right? That's the power of variables, for us to reuse this data and use it later on in the program. So functions can return 0 or 1 values. And if it's 0, then it returns this none value, this none type. Okay, so what exactly is none? So in Python, none is a special data type that represents the absence of value. It has its own data type called none type, and functions that don't explicitly return a value will implicitly return none, which kind of makes sense, right? So if I show you what it looks like, so I have this variable set equal to none, which is valid. It's a valid data, and I try to print the type of it. Let's see what happens. Okay, so it tells you that the type is none type. So again, it's also a keyword, right? It's highlighted. It's a reserved word in Python. This is big enough. Okay. So which built-in function have we seen before that doesn't give you a return value? It doesn't have a return value, and therefore returns none. Can you think of one?
Prints.
Yeah, Jola said it, print. So prints to the console, but it doesn't necessarily give you something back. So if I were to try to run this block of code, I have my string is this, and I'm setting that return value to a variable, and then I'm printing my string because it's calling this function, so it prints this, and then I'm printing the return of this, which you can see is none. So no one would ever really do this, probably. No one would ever really want that return value because it's none. There's no value there, so it implicitly gives us none. Make sense? Okay, just to show you what none is, but usually we don't really use it, but just to know. Okay, so when you're calling functions, let's look at each of these parts. So this is a function name, right? And then you open and close the parentheses to call it. And then remember, you have to specify the parameters inside the parentheses. So in this case, there's string, that's just hello world. Same thing with these other built-in functions that we've seen, typecasting ones. This is a function name, float. We open and close the parentheses to call it. And then float will take in this case, this data, this value, the 100. So again, function name, open close parentheses to call it. We have this parameter, this argument, it only takes one thing. And then we set that output, that data, to a variable so that we can use it again later. So the return value of this function call gets set to this variable and is stored in this variable. So we've done this before. We all have seen this before, right? We're just defining it more explicitly so that we know exactly what's going on. Okay, and the last example, again, function name, open close parentheses. We specify the question we want to ask with the parameter, and then that return value gets put in this variable. So we know input is always a string, so then we know response will also be a string, right? Okay, some common confusions or misconceptions. So when you call a function, nothing is automatically getting print to the console. Same thing with returning. Returning does not mean you're printing anything. Print is just a function. You can still call print inside functions, but calling returning is not the same thing as printing. Printing is not automatically going to happen unless you call it. Every function does have a return value. It might implicitly be none if you don't explicitly return something. And we'll talk more about this when we actually define our own functions. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, so checking time. Let's look at an example. So we have our answer set to the response of this. So input, how are you today? What is printed to the console is the question that we asked, right? Because that's what input does. But what's returned is whatever the user types in and hits enter. So do you see that distinction of there's something printed to the console? That's one thing that this function is doing, but that's not what the function's returning. So let me show you again in another way. So yeah, make sure it's clear what the difference between print and return is. So if I just had this input, how are you today, and I run this and I say I'm good, and I hit enter, well, that's it, right? We didn't get that good. It just printed this stuff to the console because that's what this function does. But I'm not using that good, again, I don't have that anywhere. So what I need to do is set this variable equal to the output of this function, which we know is going to be a string, right? So if I say good here, then I have this value that I can then use, and now I'm printing it to the console. So now I'm explicitly printing it. Whereas here, this is what input was doing for me. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. Y'all are so quiet today. Okay. Let's talk about importing functions. So where do functions come from? So these ones that we've seen before, print, the typecasting ones, what else have we seen? Like length, all these string functions. These built-in functions are packaged with Python. So Python provides these for us because Python knows, whoever built Python knows are going to do these things. And other programming languages are like this too. So they're built in for us to already use for free, right? What's really, really neat is we can also import other functions. So we can all get this other functionality totally for free just by importing different modules. So modules just provide us with a set of functions that we can use. It's like this code that exists in some like library, you can think of it, some module, that when you just hit import and type an import statement, we get all of that for free, which is so cool. We can like graph, we can use Tinker, which is what some students have used. We can use all these libraries that do such cool things just by importing it, just by writing one line of code. So we can use these already provided functions for us. And you might hear it being said as like importing modules or importing libraries or getting third-party whatever. There's also this like phrase of like open source, meaning that a lot of developers will write these packages or these programs for us to be able to just import into our programs to just use for free. And all of these people are like contributing to these things all over. So GitHub is like this. Open source like Stack Overflow is a community-based thing. So it's just really cool. It's really cool that you can get all these things and we can use them. So for example, we can write these import statements and import this like math library, this math module. So you can do it in two separate ways. And you saw this in lab, right? We just did this in lab kind of. So we can do import math. So we import this module math. And then if we wanted to use these functions inside that library, oftentimes we'll do this like dot notation. So math.ceiling. So we can use the ceiling function that is inside that library math, or that module math. I say library more than module, but in that library math. We could also explicitly import that one function. So we can say from this library, from this module math, import this specific function. So only this function. So then we can just directly call it like this. Does it make sense, the distinction between the two? Either of them work. The only difference is that this one you're importing the whole thing, and this one you're just importing one function. So if you know you'll need a lot of functions, it probably makes sense to do this. If you know you only need one of these functions, then it makes more sense to probably do this. You don't want to like load more than you need to, I guess. Okay, so these are how import statements will look. Okay, so let's say we just had this line of code, right? what might happen if we didn't have that import statement? Vivian's shaking her head. Something weird is going to happen, right? So it's going to say math is not defined, right? The computer's going to see that and be like, oh, is it a variable? No, I don't see it. It's not there. So I can show you also kind of what happens. So let's see what happens. I run this. Exactly what I expect, right? So we don't have this added, right? There's no math to reference. There's no module. Can't find the variable, can't find the module, so it errors. Okay, and just a note about import statements. We want to follow like good coding practices, right? We want to follow best conventions, best practices, best standards. So all import statements should be grouped together at the top of your file. Okay, so an example of math and how we can use it. So we can use these functions and these utilities, I guess you can call it. So these are all the ones that are really commonly available that you can use with math. So you can do all these functions, right? It's pretty neat. And you can also see the docs for what else is available. Another function that you can use that you might have seen before in your lab and in the project and in your homework or whatever is this random function. So it will take two integers as inputs, returns a random integer between the two numbers inclusive. So you've all seen this before. This is just an example. If you pass in 0 and 3, then you will get one of these integers at random. So this is just an example of a function that has two arguments. Make sense? So this randint function is included in the random module or the random library. An example of a program that we can write is like flipping a coin, like heads or tails. So from random, we want to import this specific randint function, and then we can use it just as it. So number is equal to randint, and if we get a 1, let's say that's heads, else the other option would be a 2, and then we get tails. Make sense? So just a little example of a program that you can write with this random function. Okay, checking time. Okay, Wordle. So we're going to do this one together, but if you go to the Colab, we can write the code that we want here. So let's use a library, let's import a library to figure out how we can get a random answer word. So remember the input, I have a file that contains a bunch of 5-letter words from which I want to pick one word at random, right, to be my answer one. That makes sense? So this is the code that we have that I kind of showed you, but it's a little bit of like a cheat or an allusion to what we'll be doing in the future. So we have our file, and remember with a file, we want to open it. So we have opening our words.txt file, and we're reading from it. And then let's say we want to get a list of these words that we read from this file. So we haven't talked about lists yet, but we kind of generally know what a list is, right? Like a bunch of things in one thing, I guess. So this code I'm telling you now is creating this list of words where we are reading each word at a time by using the file.readlines method that we've seen before, and then stripping all the new line characters because this file has them each in a new line, so script helps me do that. And then I put it in a list, so I put it in an array. And we'll talk about this more later, but just say we have a list of words, right? So if I want to try to Google how I get a random thing from a list of things, I can do this. So I will literally just type into Google, this is what I did, get an item from a list random Python. I know it doesn't sound like English, but that's how I kind of Google things, just like keywords, right? So get item from list random Python. And then tells me right away to randomly select an item from a list in Python, you can use the random.choice function from the random module. So I'm like, oh, okay, let me try to look up an example of how to do that, right? So then I'm like, random.choice Python docs. And usually I kind of ignore these ones because these ones are hard to read. But I know the more complicated things you do, you're probably going to read their real docs. But I always just look for examples. So I'm like, okay, W3 schools, that looks good to me. Let's look at this. And then I take a look at the example and I see, okay, it's importing the module, cool. And then I have this list, which I know we haven't gone over yet, but you can kind of intuitively get what's happening, right? And then it looks like it's doing random.choices, my list, and then it has all these other things. So I don't know if I want to use choices. Maybe the one let's look at this. Is it choices? No, let's do choice. Returns a random element from the given sequence. Okay, let's look at this one. Did I click it? Okay, let's look at this one. So import random my list, random.choice my list. Okay, this looks like it makes more sense. Let's try it and see. And let's just run it and see. Okay, so it looks like it gave me cherry. If I run it again, banana. So it looks like it's doing exactly what I want, right? I'm calling random.choice on this list, and then if I keep running it, it keeps giving me a random one. So I think that's what I want to use. So yeah, we can see that there are all these functions available to us to use if we just import this library, which I think is really neat. Okay, let's do it in code. Oh my gosh, what is going on? Okay, it didn't go to Wordle yet. Okay, so I have this. I'm running it. I think I need to add the file again. Oh yeah, it's not there. Okay, let me upload it. Okay, so I run this. I print the words. That looks right to me, a list of words. And then I want to use random.choice. So I want to do words. Oh wait, random.choice words, right? And then I want my answer to be this, right? Should I run it? That looks right? Should I run it? Yeah, error, right? Okay, random's not defined. Oh, okay, so what do I need to do? I need to import random, right? Ah, okay, this works. Ooh, okay, now I'm printing answer. So hover, get another one, break. Sit in. Remember, I can also do from random, import choice. But if I do this now, oh my gosh, it caches it. Okay, well, it gives me an error here. Random's not defined. So I can just do choice like that. Okay, now it works. Makes sense? So just as an example of how you can import something and how it really helps me do this, because otherwise, there are other ways to do it, but it's just so much easier to import a library to do it for me, right? It gives me this code for free. Okay, so modules and imports, review, we're almost done. What are they? Okay, so it's a set of functions written and shared by another programmer. So again, it's like a library, a module, or you can just borrow functions. You can take this code that other people write and just use them for free, which is so cool. And then if you want to load a module into your program to have these functions available, you can just import it. So you have an import statement at the top of your file. Why is this so important? Well, it makes it readable. It's more modular, meaning that you split things up into different parts. It's much easier to read, so you don't have to define everything in one file. You can have it grouped into different files. And yeah, if you want functionality for free, that's how you do it. You just import another module that does these things for you. So if there's not something that you feel like is very custom that you need to do for the data that you have, there's probably something that exists out there that you can just Google and be like, can I do this? And then you probably just import a library and it'll help you do it. And you just have to set it up. Okay, any questions? Yeah, Prashesh.
So you showed us some functions and modules, right? So are those functions and modules mutually inclusive?
Mutual inclusive as in?
So those functions won't work in another module?
So you can import a bunch of different modules and then use all of those functions. But they're all tied to a module. So you can have multiple modules. But I wouldn't be able to go into a module that I don't know or own and then try to do stuff in there. Does that make sense? So maybe the math module actually does use the random module, right? But then it tries to encapsulate it into one. So yeah, they could use each other, I guess. But I don't really know how they're abstracting all these things away from me. Make sense? Good question. Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, can you all fill out this form? I updated it, so there's maybe a little bit of new questions, but yeah, fill this out. I'll spend maybe a minute or two doing this, and then I'm just ending with some reminders. What's so funny? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, we're all able to fill it out? Still filling it out? Done? Okay, reminders! So, Adora has office hours today at noon. I also have office hours today at 3. Quiz 2 retake. I think more of you emailed me than showed up this week, so just know that today is the last day to do this retake, but you all maybe didn't email me yet or didn't know that you could do the retake. So if you want to do the retake today, try to come today. Otherwise, maybe I'll give you until Monday. But email me before with an explanation of all these answers. And yeah, again, just a reminder, I'm only allowing retakes for the week after. So if you can't come in the week after, let me know if you can't make my office hours, but then I'm closing it, so you can't do the retake anymore. And then homework 3 is due next Wednesday. Covers while loops and strings. Is that right? Yes. And then part 2 for the first project is due on Monday night, so don't forget. And it closes when it closes. There are no late submissions. Midterm exam 1 is less than 2 weeks away. So again, everything that we've talked about so far, including a bit of functions, and we'll talk a little bit more about functions next week, and then this will be everything that we get is covered on the midterm. Yeah, Moyo?
Is the midterm just going to be like the same stream of quiz?
The same what?
Is it like the same way we take the quiz?
Oh, the same format. It's going to be written. So, written exam. Yeah. Okay. And then last thing, Googler TAs. If you need help with anything, just another reminder that they're there. To book office hours with them, in case you don't know, go here, go down to Google, teaching assistants, and then there's links to book office hours. Yeah? So 3 of them have it. Andrew's going to add some, but you just click on it, and then you can see when Amon is available for you to just book a 30-minute block to do whatever you want. Yeah? I talked to them yesterday, and they have had really great experiences with whoever they've met so far. So, yeah, it's awesome that you guys are using it. But feel free to continue to use this for whatever you want. Pretty sure that was my last slide. Yeah. Okay. That's all. Have a good weekend.
He's supposed to